Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to discuss my current and recent reads. It's been a little while since I've checked in, and I have 6 books that I've completed that I want to check in with you about and then discuss a few of the books that I have on the go. It is currently May 1st. It is pouring rain outside, but it's Friday. Woo! So it can't be all bad, right? I am still working from home and nothing has changed on that front, nor will it change on that front for the foreseeable future. But in the good part of all that is I am reading quite a bit. My reading mojo appears to be back. So everything seems to be going quite well that way. So let's just get into the books that I have read in the past few weeks. I finished The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Charkaborty. That is the second book in the Daevabad trilogy, a fantasy series set in sort of a Middle East setting, kind of Arabian Nights-esque. I can't really talk about it in detail because it's obviously book 2 in a series. I buddy read it with Lindsay, and we both really, really enjoy it. If you're looking for a very richly developed fantasy series in a sort of white European Middle Ages setting, I can highly recommend the Daevabad trilogy. It's really fun and engrossing, and there's lots of descriptive writing about food and buildings and settings and all of that. It's really, really fun. So highly recommend that. I also finished a nonfiction book for Aussie April, and that's Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. This is a book about Aboriginal culture in Australia, and specifically how Aboriginal cultural achievements have been sort of wiped out of history by imposition of Western European cultural mores. And so we all think of native populations throughout the world as being sort of hunter-gatherer civilizations without advanced agriculture or other markers of advanced civilization. And Pascoe is really clear in developing his argument that, in fact, Aboriginal culture in Australia was quite developed, had agricultural customs and processes in place at the time of European contact, and those things were not brought to Australia and given to the native peoples like as a gift. That the Aboriginals already had their own agriculture happening that worked perfectly well in that climate and that environment. And in fact, the Western, the European practices that have since been imposed are bad for Australia's climate and habitat and have caused big problems that could be solved perhaps by going back to some of the Aboriginal methods of agriculture. This book was really fascinating and informative. It is written in a very academic way, and so it can't be read as quickly maybe as some other books, but I found it really fascinating. I particularly enjoyed the sections about how coastal Aboriginal cultures worked collaboratively with killer whales to kill other whales. That was fascinating. I had no idea that was a documented practice, and I am fascinated by it. I would love very much to read more about that topic, so I will be on the lookout for other books about how Indigenous cultures work collaboratively with wildlife to gather food. It was awesome. Then I finished The Duchess Deal on audio by Tessa. This is a romance novel, the first in a series. I can't remember the trilogy's name, but what to say? I enjoyed the book very much. It was funny and fun and exactly what I needed for sort of escapist listening for an audiobook. I will say though that this I'm currently reading the second book in the same series, The Governess Game, and I'm not enjoying that one very much, and I think that's why I have a hard time sort of pulling the details of the Duchess deal into my head right now. Yes, now I remember very much. So the Duke of Ashbury, who is scarred from being hit by a rocket in the Battle of Waterloo, meets a young woman born into she's a gentry, but has fallen on hard times, and she's now a seamstress. And he proposes that they get married sort of out of the blue because he needs to get an heir, and because he's scarred, no woman wants him. So he proposes this sort of marriage of convenience because he's rich and she needs money, and it's sort of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It was super fun and funny. I really enjoyed it. However, the Governess game, which I'm currently reading, is just not catching me in the same way. I don't like the main couple, Chase and Alex, as well. The humor is kind of falling flat for me, but I'm also not listening to it on audiobook, so I don't know if that's part of the reason or not. I don't know. I'll get back to you on the Governess game once I finish it. The next book that I completed in April was Measuring the World by Daniel Kahlmann. This is a book that's translated from the German. Let's see if I can find the translator here for you. It was translated from the German by Carol Brown Janeway. And this is a novel, a historical novel, that tells the story about two scientists in the 1800s in Germany. One is Alexander von Humboldt, who is the gentleman that Britta and I read the nonfiction book about, The Invention of Nature, earlier in the month. So he's one of the characters. And then the other character is Carl Gauss, who is a mathematician, the Prince of Mathematics. And so this book imagines what these two historical figures were like in their personal lives, and sort of shows them juxtaposed against one another as they go about their various different methodologies of measuring the world and learning to understand natural processes. Gauss is a type of a person that thinks you need to be in a quiet room, using your brain and pondering big questions to come up with the answer, while Humboldt is the kind of person that feels you need to explore the world, measuring and recording as you go in order to understand natural processes. And the two gentlemen meet in their older years and sort of try to impose their own thinking on each other. In the meantime, there's some side characters, and you get a little bit of a glimpse of what Germany was like, Germany which didn't exist in its current state, and so what that area of the world was like. I did enjoy this novel. I read it again as a buddy read with Britta. I will say that I don't know that I would have gotten as much out of it if I hadn't just read the nonfiction book about Alexander von Humboldt, because there were things about this book that, because I don't know very much about German history, I might have been lost when, or if I hadn't been reading it with Britta, I might have gotten really lost. But as a follow-up to that nonfiction book, it was really a really fun read. And it really gave me, I think Kahlmann did a masterful job of imagining what these two historical figures might have been like, given what we know about their personalities and what they brought to the world of science. So this was really great buddy read, again with Britta. And then number 5 for finished in April was The Farm in the Green Mountains by Alice Herdan-Zuckmayer. And I've talked about this quite a bit. This was also translated from the German by Ida H. Washington and Carol E. Washington. This is a series of basically little short essays that the author wrote while she was living in a little farm in a rural part of Vermont during World War II. She and her husband had been expelled from Germany because her husband was a playwright and he had written negative things about the Nazi Party, and so they had to flee Europe and came to the United States with their children right before the war broke out. And so this book not only tells the story of how they navigated being immigrants to a country, from a country that the country they immigrated to was at war with, which was really fascinating and really interesting perspective, but also all about what it was like for a very upper middle class couple who had servants and everything in Europe to come to a rural part of the United States and basically become farmers. And funny essays about farm animals and life on the farm and what it's like to try to live in rural Vermont during the winter when you can't get anywhere because it's too snowy. Just so much stuff that I could relate to. So many things that she talked about, like party lines on the telephone, which I experienced when I was a kid as well. how the school bus came in the wintertime. It was a station wagon, and the woman who picked them up also was delivering the mail. I mean, so many parts of what happened in rural Vermont also happened in rural Maine. Maybe not in my generation, but I've heard stories about it. So it was super fun to read about their experience living in this rural area and trying to become accustomed to how everything worked. It was just such a fun read, such a comforting read, sort of a cozy read, and very uplifting. I would highly recommend. I also want to point out that this is a New York Review of Books publication, and that is an indie press. And I know Doris has been part of an indie press project this year, and this book would fit in for the April prompt, which was New York Review of Books, and highly recommend this book. This was a 5-star read for me. And then lastly, I finished a BookTube prize book, which I can't talk about, but I'll just note it here, and that was Queenie by Candice, Carty, Williams, and I sort of mixed it up. I read part of it on ebook and part of it on audiobook. Okay, and then for what I'm currently reading, I'm still reading Regeneration by Pat Barker, which is book 1 in her trilogy about World War One. I'm buddy reading this with Sean, and this book is set up in 4 parts, and so we're reading 1 part each week. This book is amazing. I'm loving it so much. This book has so much to say about mental health and how we view mental health and how mental health was viewed in the time period in World War One, how the cultural expectations around masculinity and what you were allowed to say was hurting you were being imposed on these men who had been at war in this horrific war. It's talking about how the ethics and the morality of war, how we can ask these young men and women to put themselves in harm's way and to be killed for sometimes what's not a clearly defined purpose. Just all of those sorts of big themes, just amazing. I'm getting so much out of it. Sean and I are really enjoying our discussions, our conversations about each part as we read it. We've gotten through 2 parts so far, so we're on page, let's see, we're over halfway through. We're on 149, and this is not a super long book. It's like 250 pages. So, yeah, everybody's not wrong. This is really great. I am still continuing on with Hiilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light. I am currently just about to start part 3. This is a huge chunker, so I'm like 340 pages into this bad boy. Like I said, it was really hard going for me at first, hard for me to sort of immerse myself in this world, but I think I've gotten into the flow of it again. And I will say, I do think there's a great sense of tension and atmosphere building in this novel, because you know what's going to happen in the end, obviously, but how all of the different participants in this are acting does build a lot of tension, but there's not much action happening. And so for a book this long, it does drag a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I mean, Hiilary Mantel can write a sentence, like on a sentence by sentence basis. This is a beautiful book, but as far as like making me excited to pick it up, I mean, I have to be honest and say it's not like a thrilling read, right? I mean, not to say that the other 2 were thrilling reads, but I think there was enough major plot things happening that I was pulled along, whereas with this, they're really at 350 pages in, and it doesn't feel like much has happened at all. So, I mean, that's just my experience with it. And then today, May 1st, I cheated a little bit and picked up a book that's on my Springathon TBR. Springathon's not meant to start until May 4th, but I couldn't hold back any longer. I've been so excited about starting the books on my Springathon TBR that I picked up Seaweed Chronicles, A World at the Water's Edge by Susan Hand Shetterly. This is all about seaweed and how seaweed grows and how seaweed is used by humans. And most of this is seen through the lens of the Gulf of Maine, which is where I live. And so already there's been a couple of people mentioned in this nonfiction book who I personally know. So that's pretty cool. And some beautiful imagery of down East Maine and coastal Maine in this writing so far. So very much excited to be starting my first book for the Springathon. And that is it. Those are the books that I have recently completed, the books that I'm currently reading. There's going to be a lot more books like basically started in the next week. I have a bunch of new buddy reads coming online starting May 4th. I'm excited for those. And you'll hear all about those in my next check-in with you guys. I hope everyone is doing well and finding some good books to read, and I'll talk to you later.